What's up, everybody? Welcome to the 3 and Out YouTube page. I'm John Middlekauff, and we are talking football all day, every day. Make sure you subscribe, like the video, share it with your friends. Let's roll, baby. Very, very excited to have one of the main members of the Fantasy Pros, which biggest podcast out there by far, who's got to be gearing up. Patrick Fitzmaurice. You can find him basically every day on Fantasy Pros. This guy knows the stuff. He's a Packer guy and a Wisconsin guy. So we won't hold it against you out here on the West Coast. But, the Packers, they're coming. Wisconsin, I don't know, coming quite as strong. But, the future's bright the next 5 years.
You'll get to find out soon, John, because I believe the Badgers open their Big Ten season at USC, welcoming USC to the Big Ten. So, hopefully we're not going to be the doormats and give USC a great start to their Big Ten existence. But I'm looking forward to that. That's going to be fun. So now I get to have rivalries with people on the West Coast.
Yeah, you guys in Packerland have been very, very spoiled. I know at the start of – we're going to get into some fantasy here in a minute, but – at the start of last season, I just played the odds. I said, what are the chances you go from Favre to Rodgers to this kid being awesome? And then the first half of the season, you went, even Gutekunst was like, after the bye week, remember? He's like, he's kind of got to prove it. And then he proved it and more. And now he's a rich man. And from a fantasy standpoint, I mean, he's a guy that a lot of people, he led the NFC last year in touchdowns, right?
Yes. And admittedly, mea culpa, I was very skeptical about Joran Love. I didn't like the draft pick at the time. When they needed him to make a start in place of Aaron Rodgers in Kansas City a few years ago when Rodgers had COVID, that didn't go very well at all. It was kind of a disastrous start. So I was a Joran Love skeptic, but boy, did he come on strong over the second half of last season. I mean, he was just phenomenal. That touchdown interception ratio was like something like 23-3 over his last 9 or 10 games. Pretty incredible what he showed. So bright future for him. I'm looking forward to seeing what it brings.
Yeah, to me, the crazy part with him, obviously the numbers speak for themselves, but the eye test, the throws, I mean, it was Rodgers-like. I mean, some of the stuff he was doing, some of the darts he was throwing on the move. And clearly you watch him talk. I'm sure you have, obviously, the press conferences after the money. I mean, he's an impressive young guy. And I obviously, like Aaron, sat for a long time behind a legend and got his opportunity and went pedal to the metal.
Yeah, Love does seem like a worthy heir to the throne, John. Good kid and arm talent that makes it feel like not a pretty soft landing after Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers.
Full disclosure, my fantasy, I'm more of a gambler than a fantasy guy, but I have done a lot over the, I would say, last 6-7 years, the daily fantasy. But year-long fantasy, obviously, quarterbacks aren't usually as valuable, right, as the running backs. But some of these guys in this league, because they run and pass, has added a new dynamic the guys like Lamar Jackson and even Josh Allen, the rumors about rushing, we'll see with his feet, but Justin Herbert a little bit more with Greg Roman and Harbaugh. I was reading an article that you posted on your Twitter account about Anthony Richardson, and he clearly has to be one of the great wild cards this year. I know he's got your guy. They didn't even, I don't think, played a game last year together in the backfield. Jonathan Taylor, who's coming on at the end. That's a pretty intriguing little group with that duo right there. So from a fantasy perspective, we really don't have any data on this guy in terms of how high the ceiling could be. It's a big unknown, but the talent speaks for itself. When you're looking at the quarterbacks, I mean, what are your thoughts on Anthony Richardson coming into the season when it comes to drafting the quarterback?
I've got him quarterback 5 in my rankings, and the upside is just so appealing because he does deliver that rushing value too, and might be a more advanced passer than he was generally viewed as coming out of college. I know I've talked to some people like Matt Waldman, who does a lot of scouting and everything, and he thinks it's a lot of people thought Richardson was really raw. Waldman thinks it's more just inexperience than him being raw. Like he's really actually pretty advanced as far as like moving safeties around with his eyes and thinking his way. through progressions and everything like that. But yeah, it's that rushing upside that we're after. And he had that small sample size because of the injuries and going on injured reserve early. But like I looked at the fantasy points per snap because he had sort of this lower sample size, and Josh Allen led the league in fantasy scoring for quarterbacks. And Richardson actually had like 15% more fantasy points per snap than Josh Allen. Like when he was on the field, he just was ringing the cash machine with fantasy points, like racking it up with his arm and legs. So it's pretty exciting. And then you think about what could happen with Jonathan Taylor. And I think back to when RG3 was a rookie playing with Alfred Morris, who I think a lot of people would probably agree was not an extraordinarily talented running back. And RG3, that RPO game just totally opened up things for Morris. And in RG3's rookie year, I think Alfred Morris ran for like 1,600 yards and
I think it was like
18 touch.
1650 or something. I mean,
Yeah, it was
didn't he lead the league in rushing that year?
yeah, just ridiculous numbers. And that was Alf's rookie season too. So you would have thought he was on a Hall of Fame track after that start. But so I wonder if the Richardson Taylor combo might not look a lot like that. So I'm in on Anthony Richardson, and I'm really in on Jonathan Taylor this year.
Well, one thing's clear. I'm sure this is a key for when you guys do rankings with players because the talent obviously has to be there. But I mean, the high end in the NFL, all these guys are talented. Who their coach is and what their scheme is. You go back to RG3 and Alfred Morris. I mean, it turns out Kyle Shanahan kind of knows what he's doing when he's calling run plays and offense. And I think Shane Steichen, I think he's one of the better, younger offensive play callers in recent memory. I mean, I'd put him right there with Kyle and Sean, and I think he's got a chance to be a star. So the only question that how do we answer is the health, and he's going to have to prove that on the field. But the talent, I was at the gym one day this offseason. I looked up, and they were replaying the Rams Colts game, and it was like, Jesus, Anthony Richardson guy is really talented. I mean, and it was, against a team that at the time the Rams weren't as good, but it was really, really impressive. And so, yeah, I think the Colts, I don't think it's crazy from a gambling perspective to bet on them to win the division. Do you?
I don't know. They if they can patch up that secondary and make that work, like I think they have the horse because really good offensive line. Richardson's talented. I think they have enough as far as pass catchers, but as far as the injury thing goes, John, I mean, I know that didn't work out very well in year one for Anthony Richardson, but it's pretty reassuring that the guy's a tank, that he's almost 250 pounds and
Yeah.
isn't going to get crash test dummied if he takes a hit from a linebacker. He can withstand some shots and hopefully make it through a full season this year.
Is it fair to say Christian McCaffrey is the universal number one running back around the league?
I think so. Yes. And probably the top pick in 80%, 90% of fantasy drafts this fall.
So it's safe to say the debate really starts at kind of the 2-3 range who you like the most, or do you think there are some specific guys? Because one name I wrote down when you factor in the offensive line, when you factor in the talent on offense, a little like Anthony Richardson, but this guy's proven it, would be Saquon with the Eagles to have a big season. Is that too rich for your liking to have him in that kind of tier?
I mean, I am torn on Saquon, John, because he has not been what we loved about him when he was coming out of Penn State was that pass catching ability and the potential that he could be another Marshall Faulk type who was just
Yeah.
awesome as both a runner and pass catcher. We haven't seen him be really that good as a pass catcher since 2019. I don't think Jalen Hurts is a guy who's going to throw a lot of passes to his running backs. He just hasn't been to this point. And you do wonder if maybe with the tush push that caps Barkley's touchdown upside a little, but then again, I worry that Barkley could sort of cap Jalen Hurts touchdown run potential because Hurts has had double-digit rushing touchdowns in all three of the NFL seasons so far. I wonder if he keeps that streak alive now that they have Saquon, who they can give the ball to when they get inside the green zone. So, yeah, but you do have to like the fact that he's getting a really good offensive line for probably the first time in his career. So I think it's a net positive for Saquon to go from the Giants to the Eagles.
So who's kind of your crew of guys right behind Christian McCaffrey then in that 2 to 3 range that could just have massive seasons that when the dust settles be like that guy was the number one fantasy player in the season if they're healthy?
Yeah, I mean, I think the other clear-cut first rounders at running back, John, are Bijan Robinson and Breece Hall. And I think it's kind of splitting hairs between those two for me. And I think different people have different opinions on that one. I think Bijan Robinson was not used optimally last year with Arthur Smith,
I'd
who
agree.
seemed to favor, Tyler Algier. He gave a lot of run, and he seemed to like Algier more inside the 20-yard line. But now Falcons have a good offensive line. That offense is just going to be more robust with Kirk Cousins being able to move the chains better than either Desmond Ridder or Taylor Heineke did last year. And they play in a weak division, so they should have favorable scripts for running backs. So he's up there, and then Breece Hall, who was just a monster down the stretch last year. I mean, they understandably used him with kid gloves for much of the season coming off the knee injury, but then down the stretch, they let him eat as far as workload, and he was just cranking out some really impressive numbers. So both of those guys can catch passes. Both of those guys can do a lot of damage as runners. There is definitely a path for either of those guys to be the overall number one running back if Christian McCaffrey were to miss any time.
And you would think Bijan, Zach Robinson, going to run a Shanahan style offense, right? Which will feature that guy predominantly in the run and the pass game.
Yeah, and the Shanahan offense has just been, if you get the right running back in that system, it's just been gold.
Not playing best ball at DraftKings? You're missing out. Here's what you need to know. DraftKings Best Ball Millionaire Contest is their biggest fantasy contest ever. We're talking 15 million guaranteed prize pool with that's right, 2 millionaires being crowned for the first and second place. If you're set it and forget it type, then Best Ball is for you. No waiver wires, no roster management, bigger roster so injuries won't end your season. Only the draft, and that's it. You're set for the year. 15 million prize pool. Still not convinced? Check this out. This year, DraftKings is offering everyone a Draft One, Get One special. Your $20 entry fee scores you a bonus ticket. Get in on all the best ball action. Download the DraftKings app and use the code JOHN, that's code JOHN, for all customers who enter the NFL Best Ball 15 Millionaire contest to get a bonus ticket and get a shot at being crowned one of the 2 millionaires only on DraftKings. Okay, let's talk some quarterbacks. We'll start with your guy. I mean, could he have a 40 touchdown type season, Joran Love and the Green Bay Packers?
Optimistically, yes. And they start with a pretty easy schedule, too. Things don't pick up for them schedule-wise until November. So if you want to get your team off to a pretty hot start, maybe Love is a good guy to target. Gets to open with the Eagles, who had some, I know they drafted a bunch of cornerbacks, but they did have a lot of secondary problems last year. So, yeah, I'm excited about him. And we like the weapons, right? Down from like running wide receiver 1, which I don't even know if that's Christian Watson or Jaden Reed or Romeo Doubs, all the way down to Bo Melton, their 5th receiver, who was actually the first Packers receiver to have a 100-yard game last year and might be the fastest guy on the team. So just so many good young pass catchers. Doesn't have to worry about a defense taking away any one of them. He's got a couple of good tight ends too. So like good infrastructure for him. Yeah, he has a great deal of upside. I think I only have him ranked quarterback 10, but a top 5 finish is certainly within his range of outcomes.
Yeah, Jacobs can catch the ball too. He's just got to stay on the field. We mentioned this guy earlier, Jalen Hurts. I know he threw a bunch of picks last year, but the running and passing, and obviously the receivers are freaking awesome. The tight end's good. Add Saquon, like you said. I mean, the pass game hasn't been his forte with the Giants, but I mean, it's kind of been a disaster there offensively. A couple years ago, Jalen was incredible, and last year down the stretch kind of fell apart. But the offensive coordinator changed. How much does Kellen Moore factor in to where you think about him? I mean, he's been a little more pass heavy. Is that fair to say than the runs?
Yeah, hopefully we get a revival of Jalen Hurts under Kellen Moore, because there was such a drop off last year in terms of the passing efficiency, going from, I think, 8 yards per attempt or thereabouts in his last year with Shane Steichen to like 7.2 or 7.3 last year, whatever it was. And just The interception rate ticked up. And then just there were instances where it just seemed like the wheels came off for the offense. I mean, we remember that shouting match on the sideline with Dallas Goedert during that disastrous playoff game against the Buccaneers. It seemed like things just went off the rails there. And with the talent he's got among his pass catchers, with A.J. Brown, with Davante Smith, with Dallas Goedert, and that offensive line, like you would think things are going to bounce back for Hurts. But I do worry about Saquon cutting into his rushing numbers as far as touchdowns. And the yardage numbers kind of fell off last year in rushing. So he's not one of my top 3 fantasy quarterbacks, but he's right on the doorstep. And, certainly if someone wants to take him as their second quarterback behind Josh Allen, I'm not going to criticize that decision.
Is it safe to say, would you take Anthony Richardson over Jalen Hurts at the start of the season?
I believe I do have Richardson ranked ahead of Hurts. And I know that's not a consensus. Let me just check on that, John.
So it's safe to say your top couple is Lamar, Allen, or, no particular order. Those guys are top 5 quarterbacks, right, from a fantasy perspective.
Yeah, now I've actually got Richardson 4 and Hurts 5.
Who do you have 3?
I've got Josh Allen 3, Lamar 2, and Mahomes back in the number 1 spot. I just think Mahomes is going to he was so hamstrung last year by not having a wide receiver who could get open downfield. Like Rashee Rice was all manufactured stuff, little hitches and wide receiver screens. And like he was dealing with Marquez, like probably his most reliable downfield weapon last year was Justin Watson. Now he's got Hollywood Brown, he's got Xavier Worthy, he's got some speed that I'm sure the mad scientist Andy Reid is going to love to play with and draw things up. Like I'm expecting a big bounce back for Patrick Mahomes this year, and he runs a little bit too, which helps.
Yeah, I mean, let's face it. Andy did it last year because he had to, but he wants to pass and he wants to throw deep.
Yes.
So I mean, he's going to win no matter what. He would much rather win with a quarterback throwing 40 touchdowns than a running back rushing for 2,000 yards, right?
Yeah.
If all things being equal.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll point out, John, is I forget exactly how many touchdowns the Chiefs scored last year during the regular season. I want to say it was like 36 or 30.
Couldn't have been many,
like
right? Because they weren't scoring many points.
Yeah, and if you look back at the Reid-Mahomes pairing, like that touchdown count for them is usually like in the upper 50s. I mean, they are going to get a big bounce on touchdowns this year. And, I'm pretty safe to say that Patrick Mahomes is going to have a hand in a lot of those extra touchdowns.
So if you like Mahomes, from a drafting perspective, would you double down on Worthy, the rookie?
Right now, I've got
receivers can be tough, right?
Yeah, I've got him behind Hollywood Brown and Rashee Rice, but not a big gap between any of those 3 right now.
You're dialed in on the NFC North. The Bears, a lot of hype, right? A lot of hype. And DJ gets this massive contract. And sometimes I kind of forgot. Listen, I've loved DJ Moore for years, but you look at his numbers, you're like, that is way better than I even realized playing with the quarterbacks in which he played with. But now you add Keenan Allen, you add Rome, you add DeAndre Swift. Is it safe to say that his numbers, like, would he be the number 1 wide receiver still for you on that team?
On that team, yes. But
do you feel he comes back to earth a little bit? He was 96, 1,308. Maybe he has the same touchdowns, but is he getting 96 catches this season?
Probably not. We do expect a more of an even target distribution with that team, with Keenan Allen, who's obviously going to command targets. And if Rome Odunze is everything he's cracked up to be. I mean, that guy, Odunze, was amazing in college. Pretty much anything that's thrown his way. I mean, just a master of contested catches. So, yeah, and then maybe it gets a little bumpy with a rookie quarterback in the passing game. It always does. Well, for most rookie quarterbacks. So, yeah, I think we have to look at least a little bit of a drop off for DJ Moore in terms of reception volume, but I've still got him inside my top 20 for fantasy at wide receiver.
Well, obviously, if those guys are going to produce, that means the quarterback who's got as much hype as anyone since Andrew Luck. The rookie quarterback, he's got to be the number 1 rookie quarterback for you on the board. What are realistic expectations for a guy that because let's face it, if they don't win 9 games, I would say it's going to feel like a pretty big disappointment, anything under 500. And the pressure there is going to be pretty intense. And we know the division. I think you guys are clearly going to be good. And the Lions, I think, are pretty stacked. So you can finish third, have a good season. Minnesota clips you once, all of a sudden you're 8-9. You actually didn't play that bad.
Yeah, man, if Caleb stays healthy all year, I would guess he's going to finish somewhere around 3,800 yards and 25 TDs or so. And maybe that's a little conservative, but no, we have to expect the rookie ups and downs.
For sure.
So, but like I love him as a prospect, John. I don't know how you feel about him.
Yeah, I mean,
He played in your
that
neck of the
talent's
woods.
pretty special.
Yeah, and like I'm not knocking him for any of the. I know it wasn't the year USC wanted to have last year, but that offensive line was kind of falling apart. Didn't have an abundance of great pass catchers. Like he's going to a better supporting cast in Chicago than he had last year, and that's the nice thing because rookie quarterbacks are typically going to terrible teams like Bryce Young did last year, and Caleb gets this great group of pass catchers. And the Bears, it's been so long since the Bears have had like more than one good pass catcher. DJ Moore showed up and that ended kind of a long drought. And, they had Brandon Marshall for a while, but normally it's just, I don't know. I don't remember a Bears pass catching group being this electric ever.
I'm with you. What was CJ last year? 26 touchdowns and like not that many interceptions. Had a historic rookie season. So if he could get around there, even I think he might throw a couple more picks. Feels like he's a little more, got a little Favre to him. But like you said, USC last year, the USC that anyone, the way it's talked about, like the Pete Carroll days, that team last year was an embarrassment. I mean, it really was. The offensive line, the defense, that was not. They earned 7-5 and probably could have been worse. I mean, they got very lucky in an Arizona game. They were really bad. So I think you got to look at 2 years ago when he was a little bit better. He was better, obviously won the Heisman, but he had Jordan Addison, and he was a star that year. And this is going to be, to me, more. The only thing I wonder about, and this is what the advantage Kyle has, McVay has, you guys have in Green Bay. When your head coach is the play caller, they work hand in hand with the guy. This is not that scenario with the Bears, right? Defensive head coach Shane Waldron, who I like. He came coach with McVay, so that system, I'm sure he changes it a little bit for Caleb, but some of that stuff, the play action, if you can get the run game going, it does make it easier on the quarterback, and he doesn't have to be hero ball as much as he has been in college, right?
Right. Caleb's improvisational skills are so impressive, but I think he had to exercise those improv skills far more last year than anyone would have liked. And as good as he is when the play breaks down, they're definitely going to have some plans for him. And I don't think he's going to have to deal with, the improv stuff nearly as much as he did last year.
It's pretty clear that, I mean, Jayden's, I think, fair to say he's going to end up starting. I know they haven't officially announced that. Drake May's not, JJ McCarthy's not, Michael Penix obviously is not, and Bo Nix. So we talk Caleb. Between Jayden and Bo Nix, who do you, if you had to rank the rookie quarterbacks, if you have Caleb 1 from a fantasy perspective, how are you going 2-3?
So believe it or not, John, I actually have Jayden Daniels ahead of Caleb just a little bit, and it's because of the running. Yeah, and that's a risk with him because he will get crash test dummied, and he's got to learn to protect himself a little better than he did in college, because we saw him leave a game last year against Alabama, where I think it was Dallas Turner, just clobbered him and knocked him out of a game that LSU was in. And as soon as he left, of course, Alabama just roared ahead. But I am anxious to see Jayden Daniels paired with Cliff Kingsbury, who coaxed a top 10 fantasy season out of Kyler Murray in Kyler's rookie season. Kingsbury has been criticized at times. He's got a little bit of his passing offense in Arizona could be a little more horizontal than vertical at times, which people didn't always love. But Cliff does really push the tempo, which means more plays and, more fantasy value for his quarterbacks and everyone in the offense. And he's going to have to deal with a shaky offensive line. I would say Washington probably is a bottom 5 offensive line, but he does have some pass catching talent with Terry McLaurin. We'll see if they can get Jahan Dotson back in track. They drafted Luke McCaffrey. They drafted Ben Sinnott, a good-looking tight end. So I'm excited about what he's going to do. I think he's going to give you a lot of fantasy value with his legs right away. And this is a guy who threw, I think, a combined 31 touchdown passes just to Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas at LSU in like 13 games last year. So there's some touchdown upside as well.
I've been thinking a lot about how I'm going to pick the divisions and who I want to gamble on. I think one team that a lot of people are high on or that are going to make strides would be Washington. I think I'm going to go the other way. Not that I don't, I like Adam Peters. I like Dan Quinn. Big picture, obviously, the quarterback's talented. I just wonder if their team's not going to be that good this year, right? They had to go heavy on the draft and sign. And there's a lot of buzz. I'm probably going to pick them to finish last in that division. And I hear you on the Kyler stuff. Kyler, who was thicker, built a little more like a tank, it felt like he was more natural at avoiding the hits. He'd get out of bounds. He was so fast. I mean, he's just one of the most electric players. And like you said, this guy's a little more Michael Vick, that even in this day and age where Steve Atwaters and the John Lynches aren't killing it, you still get hit hard if you're running around. And he's going to have to run around, like you said, because their offensive line's terrible. It makes me nervous. Even though it's hard to watch LSU last year and not see, I mean, it's oozing with talent. But as the talent he had on that team, right? The two sweet wide receivers, one guy could be a superstar. The offensive line, they have a left tackle who I think is going to be a top 10 guy. It's just, he's relative to his opponents, like this is a huge downgrade for him, right? What's surrounding him.
Yes, I think so. And the body type is certainly more Lamar than,
Skinny.
Right. He's not a thick guy or not a thick guy like Anthony Richardson, not a compact guy like Kyler Murray. But Lamar always had this sense of like how to avoid those big hits. Like Lamar just kind of shimmies his way around those big kill shots that people are trying to deliver. And I don't know if Jayden Daniels has that skill yet. The one thing about the defense, John, and I agree with you on Washington overall. Sometimes having a bad defense can actually be a good thing for a quarterback and putting them in,
That's true.
like I think we could see the same thing with Tua this year with everything Miami lost on defense in free agency, along with their coordinator, Vic Fangio. Like the Dolphins and Commanders defenses could be pretty shaky this year, which might lead to some shootout game scripts for Jayden Daniels and Tua.
It does feel that's a good point from a fantasy perspective. When your defense is awesome, like the Chiefs were, the Ravens, it does slow down the game a little bit. You gain control in the second half. These coaches, this isn't college. You're not trying to run up the score. When you're playing in these shootouts, you just kind of let it rip. I think CJ Stroud benefited a little bit from that last year, right? Their defense wasn't as good as it's going to be this year, and they just had to let it rip to win games.
Yeah, and Jayden Daniels will be pretty familiar with that with the defense he had to play with at LSU last year. So he's no stranger to these OK Corral type game scripts.
You think Bo Nix can throw 20 plus touchdowns this year?
Maybe he can get to 20, John. He's really interesting. I don't know what to make of him. Maybe he's the perfect Sean Payton ball control quarterback. Like he threw such a high percentage of screen passes throughout his college career. Like he was way above any other quarterback prospect in percentage of screens. And I think he'll probably be a dump off machine too. Like I'm really keeping tabs on the Denver running back situation because Sean Payton's teams perennially lead the league or near the top of the league in running back targets. We saw it like time and time again in New Orleans, whether it was Reggie Bush or Pierre Thomas or Alvin Kamara, running backs catching a lot of passes. And Denver had 153 running back targets last year, most in the league. And now you've got this guy who's kind of a check down and screen machine in Bo Nix. Like, I want to pay attention to see if Jaleel McLaughlin has an expanded role this year, and they've really been talking him up. I guess he went out and got a jugs machine in the offseason so he could work on that by himself, like in the park down the street. I want to see if Javonte Williams is back to his old self after looking a little bit, maybe diminished last year coming off the knee injury. So, yeah, Nix is interesting for sure. I don't think he's going to be a league winning type of player for fantasy managers, but I do think there's maybe a little bit of sneaky upside.
I saw the Niners running back Jordan Mason say that he also bought a $3,000 jugs machine this offseason and had his dad. They'd go out like every other day and they'd shoot like 500 balls. So that's obviously you have to catch the ball in the modern day game, right? I mean, it's a must. Before it was so many Derrick Henry types used to be the majority of the league, and then Marshall Faulk or LaDainian Tomlinson, the true 3-down back who could also catch, would stand out. Now it feels like all the top guys, have that in their repertoire, right? And that's just only going to continue moving forward with what's coming out of college.
Yeah, and speaking of jugs machines, I think Marvin Harrison Jr. has some. He likes working with some turbo one that throws footballs like at the speed of sound or something like that. So he's ready for anything.
Do you think he's a good name? I mean, toward the end of the season, Kyler, that game against the Eagles, when he really started getting his mojo, he hasn't always been my favorite. Just like I wouldn't have invested that much money in that guy, but there has never been any argument about the guy's physical gifts. And when you get him on a game, he could be playing with me and you, or you could have Larry Fitzgerald and Marvin Harrison out there. You could lose that game when he gets hot. And he's done that countless times the last couple of years. To me, he's a massive wild card this year. I don't know how good their team's going to be, but he proves time and time again, like if you go in sleeping on them, all of a sudden he's got, and he gets hot. Sometimes you watch him, in that first quarter, like, God, there's kind of a malaise. And then by like the third quarter, he's like a Kevin Durant. It's like, he's hit 3 threes in a row. You better watch out. And then he's just coming and there's no stopping him.
Fantasy managers, I think, have noticed that where if you are a Kyler Murray investor, you'll be wondering and alarmed when he goes into halftime with like 3.9 points, and all of a sudden it's the end of the game and he's finished with like 23 and a half. So he can get streaky. Indeed, I think his season might depend on whether Marvin Harrison is merely good or truly special. And I think truly special is in play for that guy. I mean, I'm out here in Big Ten country, John, like watching Marvin Harrison every week. Like, I just don't think that guy has any holes in his game whatsoever. I mean, he's maybe not the route runner that his dad was just yet, but like he works at it. Exactly. And, when you're that big, obviously, he's got a little bit of size on his dad, and his contested catch skills are pretty special. I think he's going to be fantastic from the jump.
I mean, if I told you Malik Neighbors, was on certain teams, you'd be like, put your chips in the middle of the table. But when I say that Daniel Jones is a starting quarterback, it's hard to be that high. And I love to me, he was my favorite wide receiver because I was thinking ceiling. There's no Marvin Harrison can't fail. This guy, you get with the wrong quarterback, he could feel underwhelming just because of his skill set. But I don't know. Maybe that Dayball can get him quick screens. You just get him the ball, end arounds. If Daniel Jones is unable to push the ball down the field, which I wouldn't really call that his go-to move.
Yeah, you just wonder if Daniel Jones is going to like let the air out of Malik Neighbors' tires in his rookie year. But the point of optimism I'm clinging to as someone who has drafted Neighbors in a lot of these early drafts I've done, John, is that 2 years ago, Daniel Jones in Brian Daboll's first year with the Giants were 16th in offensive touchdowns. They were middle of the pack. And if they can just get back to that, I would think Malik Neighbors is going to stake out a pretty big share of those offensive touchdowns.
Because Daniel Jones 2 years ago threw 15 touchdowns. Is that the number, I think?
Is that what it was?
Yeah. So, I mean, but if I tell you that Daniel Jones throws 16 touchdowns, I think we'd all say, well, I bet Malik Neighbors has 6 or 7 of those potentially, right?
Hopefully.
Some of those could be on a slant, broken tackle, stuff like that. He has that ability.
Yeah, they just have so little else at wide receiver. I mean, Jalen Hyatt's an interesting deep threat, but then what? Wan'Dale Robinson, Darius Slayton, there's just not much else there.
So you have an upcoming fantasy football draft? Well, then you need to check out the Fantasy Pros Draft Wizard. When you sync your fantasy football league with Draft Wizard, you'll get an instant report that shows you how the rest of your league drafts. You'll see who overdrafts rookies in early rounds, who's going to be the person to take that first QB off the board, and which manager is going to always reach for that hometown player every single time. And then you take those patterns directly into the draft draft simulator and make your mock draft feel like the real thing. When your real draft comes around, you're going to be ready, and the draft assistant will be there for you to give you live pick-by-pick insights and expert recommendations of who to draft and when to draft them. You can see all of this and more at fantasypros.com/volume today.
You tweeted this article. I'm not sure if you wrote this part or someone else did, but that George Kittle gets talked about like he gets overdrafted a lot when it turns out he's actually underdrafted. Can you explain your thoughts on the tight end in San Francisco as a player? Because just as a fan, I'd go, yeah, it feels like he's been banged up. He's not quite the same player, but he turns out to be a pretty productive individual from a fantasy perspective, correct?
He does, John. But what I think can be a turnoff to some people is that he is very inconsistent with his week-to-week production. And I think part of that is the curse of him being such a great blocker. And sometimes that's more the game plan with George Kittle, that they're going to use him to, maybe help chip on an especially dangerous edge rusher, or they decide to go run heavy in a particular week, and George Kittle is used to help in that regard. But other weeks when they feature him in the passing game, he can just go off. And, we've seen him with multiple 1,000-yard seasons. And, I will take the inconsistency week to week. I want that guy who can give me the incredible spike weeks from a position where you do not get a lot of spike weeks typically. So, I have seen him underdrafted in some leagues, but I almost never see George Kittle overdrafted in leagues anymore. Like, no one reaches for George Kittle in drafts these days. And, I am a big advocate of drafting George Kittle at his average draft position, which, typically this year you can get him around the sixth round in most 12-team leagues. I think he's a good value there.
Would you say, beside remove McCaffrey, like you said, the Niners more of like a daily fantasy team, because week to week George could have no catches, and the next game he has 3 touchdowns. Deebo Samuel, you don't see him for 2 weeks, then he has 2 straight weeks where he gets 2 touchdowns each game.
Yeah, and that's it. Brandon Aiyuk, I think, has been one of the more overvalued guys this year, because people saw that he had a 1,300-yard season last year. And I think he's really talented, but he did that on only 105 targets. And he just had freakish numbers as far as yards per catch, yards per target, yards per route run. We're probably going to get a little bit of regression to the mean there. And even though like his efficiency numbers in all those categories are going to be above average because he's a really good player. But I looked at the number of the receivers who had between 100 and 110 targets last year. Their average yardage output was like 990. And Aiyuk outkicked that by like almost 400 yards. So I just don't think, unless they find a lot more targets for him, which might be like, it might take a long-term injury to someone else in that offense. I just don't know if he can live up to top 12, top 15 receiver status. And that's how he's being drafted this year.
And I think from an on-the-field standpoint, I think that's their biggest issue with this contract, because in any other world, in any other business, the numbers of all these other contracts, if we were trying to sell a house or acquire a business, Amon-Ra St. Brown, DJ Moore, their stats speak for themselves, where Aiyuk is this unique player. Like you said, he is a talented guy and he has a rapport with Brock Purdy, but his numbers, because of the offense, which last time I checked isn't going to change with Kyle Shanahan there. So it's kind of a conundrum they're in, which honestly makes me nervous even about drafting him. If they don't get a contract and they don't trade him and he's playing on the contract, is he mentally there? And speaking of the Niners, Purdy, to me, Purdy and Goff are two guys, right, that they have a lot of weapons. They put up really good stats. The running, Goff doesn't move at all. Purdy can, but I wouldn't call him really a running threat past the line of scrimmage. He keeps plays alive, which is definitely additive because he puts up a lot of extra stats scrambling around. Who do you like more out of those two guys from a statistical standpoint this year?
I have to go with Purdy, just because he was so insanely efficient. I even though Ben Johnson is a really good offensive coordinator, I'll take the Shanahan system over the Ben Johnson offense. You have to, I think. And with the surrounding talent he has, and boy, I'd like to see Purdy run a little more. He looked pretty nimble in the playoffs as a runner, didn't he?
No, he's an underrated, and I think we talk about Anthony Richardson. when they drafted Trey Lance, I think they thought they were getting this physical specimen that could move. It turns out Trey's not very fast. And then they get Purdy, and he moves dramatically better. He's just quicker, quick twitch. Again, he's not taking off like Lamar Jackson or Anthony Richardson down the field, but behind the line of scrimmage, they get a lot of big plays from that, the 49ers. Where the Lions are a good example. They're paying all this in the offensive line because they have to, because their guy is a very old school statue who's a good pocket quarterback, but he can't move around like a Jordan Love, a Brock Purdy, which is, I would say, pretty consistent with the modern game of football. Most of these guys are pretty good athletes, right?
Yes. And so Purdy is he is such a good proxy for Kyle Shanahan and being that just running that offense and being the distributor, being the perfect pass first point guard for that offense. And I don't know if he has top 10 fantasy upside, but I think there's a really good chance he finishes in that 10 to 15 range again. So he's like one of the safer plays I think you can make at quarterback in fantasy.
Let's end on some running backs just with the unit. Jim Harbaugh, we know, likes to run the ball. We had a game last year against Penn State. I think technically he was suspended, but he was probably high-fiving everyone at home, where I don't think the quarterback threw it over 10 times. And that's kind of been his ethos going back to San Diego, obviously at Stanford with the 49ers. J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards. I mean, that's the group. I mean, if you're going to draft one, you got to kind of draft them both. You clearly don't have to draft them both as high as some of these other names, correct?
Yeah, the nice thing is they're both going pretty late, and you can get them pretty cheaply. Gus, I think, is going to start, but there's not a lot of pass catching upside, and he's had some injury issues. And we know J.K. Dobbins' injury history, which is pretty bleak, to have blown out his knee and have torn an Achilles. But apparently he's looked pretty good in camp so far. I do think in a lot of leagues as a late round pick, Kamani Vidal, it might be a sneaky option. The all-time leading rusher for Troy University, a 6th round pick this year, and just like a little bowling ball. I like him a lot. Obviously, it's going to take some time for him to get traction on the depth chart, especially with maybe kind of an old school coach like Harbaugh, who's not going to quickly promote rookies. But if Goss and or Dobbins can't hold up, I wouldn't be surprised to see Vidal playing a fantasy relevant role at some point pretty soon.
Okay, let's go to his brother. Derrick Henry had one of the great stretches, definitely the last 25 years for there with Vrabel and the Titans. Felt like he was kind of falling off, but he still had 12 touchdowns last year. What do you take away, and what do you make of him, Lamar, that offense? Is that a fit? It does feel, when you close your eyes, you don't quite see it, but maybe it does work. Does he have anything left? What are your thoughts on old King Henry?
That's funny that you say that, John, about closing your eyes and trying to see that, because I've been doing the same thing, and it's just hard for me to picture Lamar and Henry playing together. I can't wait to see it, but I can't picture it just yet. But the over under right now, I think the total on season-long touchdowns for Derrick Henry is 10.5. And so they are expecting double-digit touchdowns. And I don't know if I could argue with that. Probably not going to catch a lot of passes in this offense. That's just how it is. And Henry's never been a prolific pass catcher anyway. But what Lamar Jackson could open up for Derrick Henry with his own running ability, the touchdown potential in that offense, because unlike Jalen Hurts, the Ravens really don't like running Lamar inside the 5 or 10 yard line. It's pretty exciting. You just have to hope he continue to fend off Father Time, because he's on the wrong side of 30 now, and it's the age where we often start to see a slowdown for running backs. And here's one who's led the league in rushing attempts in 4 of the last 5 years. So when the end comes, it could come quickly. But then again, Derrick Henry might just be a different breed. Like, this guy's not built like other running backs.
If you told me right now he gets 10 touchdowns, you would have to say their offense is going to be pretty successful, because Lamar's at minimum going to account for another 5 to 7 minimum, right? Let's just give him 6. A couple other running backs will chime in. I mean, they'd have around 20 touchdowns on the ground, right? If he's getting them 10, which he's had double digits for basically every year when he's healthy. But like you said, it's just the fit. I guess I just envision more quicker, not scat backs, but just different than his style, who's more old school Adrian Peterson. You got to keep handing the ball. You're cool with some 2-yard losses, and then all of a sudden he busts 30 and then he gets rolling. Is that really how they've played with one individual running back? It doesn't quite seem that way. Maybe I'm wrong. Stats would not back that up, but it feels like they rotate a lot of guys in and out. Are they just going to hammer him maybe on an individual game, but over and over throughout the season? I don't know.
Yeah, it seems like you have to play it that way with him, especially with maybe Keaton Mitchell, who could be that speedy change of pace guy, possibly not available if they decide to pup him after the late season knee injury last year. But yeah, you would think he's going to get a very robust workload, and you're right, that has not been the Ravens' way.
He might not be fast anymore, but because his running back room doesn't really exist with anyone else, and he's still a good goal line back, the Cowboys and Zeke. Uh, what are your thoughts on that situation when it comes to Zeke? I mean, is he a guy? We talk about Derrick Henry getting 10 touchdowns. It's possible Zeke could have double-digit touchdowns this year for the Cowboys. Not that he's going to have a lot of yards, but he could just have a lot of goal line, and inside the 10 carries.
I've actually found myself drafting him more than I ever have in any year previously. Well, it used to be hard to acquire him, and now it's not. But he's going to play a role in that offense, and maybe a substantial one. And last year in New England, we saw him like really return value as a pass catcher. Like he showed that he's still a very good pass catcher. And like it wouldn't surprise me if he got to play a lot on passing down still. It used to be that was Tony Pollard's gig and Zeke was the early down guy. But I don't know if they have a better pass catching back on that roster than Zeke. So I think he could be sneaky valuable in fantasy this year.
Okay, I'll get you out of here on this because I was watching. Have you watched Netflix Receiver at all?
I haven't. I've been busy with the Hard Knocks off season with the Giants front office. So I got to catch up on Receiver. I'm still a little bit now, and now I'm going to have the training camp Hard Knocks to get through. I'm falling behind here, John.
There's a lot of Hard Knocks flying out there. That Giants Hard Knocks was quite the eye opener, wasn't it? But on the Receiver, it follows Justin Jefferson and Davante as two of like the 4 or 5 guys, and they just popped into my head. Obviously, Justin is the highest paid wide receiver of all time, but his quarterback room is pretty questionable. Right, he's got this rookie kind of project, and Sam Darnold, who Kyle likes, but is he any good? We're gonna find out early on this year. And then Davante with his quarterback, he left Aaron Rodgers, and he's learned a valuable lesson. It's not quite the same, and he's admitted as much. When it comes to those two guys, clearly, if you put them with a Josh Allen or Mahomes, you would be like, these guys are going to catch 100 balls with their eyes closed. But in their two scenarios, probably like Justin Jefferson more, just his coach is also the play caller. But I don't know. I mean, they both make me a little nervous going through transitional years at that position, right?
That's exactly it, John. Like in any year, if the Vikings had a proven entrenched quarterback, Justin Jefferson is like in the 101 conversation, first pick overall. But now with this transitional period at quarterback the Vikings are going through, he is typically going either 4th or 5th among wide receivers behind CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase, and sometimes Amon-Ra St. Brown. Like I think it's about a 50-50 as to whether you'll see Jefferson or Amon-Ra go first in a fantasy draft. But then again, Jefferson is so good. Like he might be quarterback proof. I think like last year when Nick Mullins was in there, like Mullins was just such a careless, aggressive thrower of the ball downfield who, I mean, if you let that guy start for a full season, he might throw 60 interceptions. But you liked him if you were a Justin Jefferson investor because you knew he was going to take shots downfield. I think that's what you're hoping for to some extent, that like JJ McCarthy isn't so self-conscious about turnovers that he's afraid to air it out and let Jefferson make plays on the ball. So hopefully Jefferson wins his confidence and, plants it in his head. Hey, might look like I'm not open. Throw me the ball. I'll come down with it. I'm sorry.
Continue. No, keep going.
Oh, I was just going to say Davante. So, yeah, I mean, he's more like a mid-second round pick, I think. But even with Aiden O'Connell as his primary quarterback last year, he did manage to top 100 receptions and, get about 1,100 yards. So, I just can't fade that guy. I mean, I watched him in Green Bay for too long, John, for me to completely dismiss him because of the quarterback situation.
I was going to say the year Jimmy Garoppolo tore his ACL, the 49ers did start Nick Mullins a lot, and they ended up with the number 2 overall pick. So it's not an ideal situation when Nick Mullins, you got to roll him out each week. Patrick Fitzmaurice, obviously on Fantasy Pros, which is one of the biggest podcasts in all the internet and sports. Anywhere else anyone listening can find you?
Yeah, if they are on Twitter, they can find me there at Fitz_FF. And yeah, just be sure to check out fantasypros.com if you are preparing for your fantasy draft, because we've got you covered on that site.
Do you have a hot take on from a fantasy perspective that you're just going to die on this hill going into the season, that it's a little out of left field that a lot of people are pushing back in your world?
I really I'm way above consensus on Brian Robinson at running back for the Washington Commanders, who even I thought was just a guy for a while, but I think he's better than I initially gave him his due for. And I do think Jayden Daniels is really going to open things up, and I'm not too worried about Austin Eckler challenging him that much for early down carries and snaps.
Patrick Fitzmaurice, thanks a lot, man. And let's have a great season.
Thanks, John. You too.